Erev Tov Beersheba, Boker Tov in Boston. Greetings to all friends of Israel around the world. My name is Wayne Firestone. I'm the executive director of the America-Israel Friendship League. And for those with us over the last week or so, yes, I've got my weekend voice and my summer is back. And we hope that will hold. It was a rough week for all of us, for all of our friends and family in Israel. And we are delighted to have a little bit of shaket today and over the weekend, and we hope that holds. We are now officially in the next stage of summer virtual tours. We are hoping to take you to places either you haven't been in a long time, but to whet your appetite to get back. And who other than Reuven Solomon to take us on one of these amazing tours. Reuven, today I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. It's about 90 degrees plus and 32 degrees plus Celsius, give or take. But I know I can't complain because you're taking us to the Dead Sea and Qumran, and I take it that the temperatures can rise significantly above what we're experiencing here. So we'll leave it in your good hands to take us on a tour and to get us back there in person. First of all, how are you doing? And tell us a little about where you're going to take us today.
Shalom, Wayne, and shalom to all our good friends of the AIFL. It's a real pleasure to be with you once again after, as Wayne mentioned, a rough couple of weeks that we've gone through, but things are settling in, and I'm very, very glad to be with you to take you to one of the hottest in Israel, Dead Sea, and the lowest site on all of the earth, 400 and something like today, 412 meters below sea level, the lowest place on earth. Today we're going to visit this area that is northwest of the Dead Sea, right at the northwestern edge of the Dead Sea, where it was Pliny the Elder, the interesting, fascinating Roman geographer and historian, who you may know, he dies in the Vesuvius disaster in Pompeii, being there trying to save it. But in his great writings, he writes about how a group of Jews called the Essenes or the Essenes live above the Dead Sea, on a plateau above the Dead Sea, amongst he mentions on the northwestern edge of the Dead Sea, amongst the sulfur fumes. He tells us a little bit about the Essenes, and we're going to be discussing them a little bit today, because the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essenes are connected very, very strongly, according to most historians and archaeologists, although there's a minority school that still holds out that it might not have been the Essenes. But we'll talk about that as we get further on. What I want to show you, and this has a very great bearing on the story, is where Qumran is on the map. You'll notice that bulge around that looks a little like a kidney on the western side of the Jordanian border with Israel is what is called the West Bank. This area was under Jordanian control from the time of the independence of Israel, and at the end of the War of Independence, according to agreement, the Jordanians sat in those boundaries that we call euphemistically the West Bank, because it's on the western bank of the Jordan River, and Israel is in the rest of the lighter area here. And this has a great bearing on our story, because it is during this Jordanian period of occupation in the so-called West that our story really begins. Our story begins in a dry riverbed that you're going to see in just a moment, called Wadi Qumran. this dry riverbed goes past and underneath a plateau that has a ruin called Khirbet Qumran, which means in Arabic, archaeological ruin of Qumran. And it is in this Wadi, dry riverbed, that a young Arab Bedouin boy, around the age of 15, 16, is herding his sheep and goats. And you'll see the Wadi in a moment in the next slide, where in this Wadi, he's herding his sheep and his goats, actually. He didn't have any sheep at that time. But one of the goats gets close to the edge of a ledge that makes the young Bedouin boy his name Muhammad bin. He had a nickname El Dib, which means the wolf. And he's worried that this goat might slip off the ledge. So he picks up a stone, and from below he tosses the stone close to the goat's feet, he hopes, to scare the goat either up or down. And this rock, this stone that he throws, enters a small opening in the side of the cliff, an erosion that was actually the entrance to a cave. Muhammad bin hears the ping, and his eyes light up with dollar signs, because what could be in jars that obviously made that ping, but treasures. He throws another stone in and hears the ping again to confirm the find, but it's too late in the day for him to do any exploration on his own. But the next day he comes back with a cousin, and they go into the cave, and in the next slide you'll see the cave I'm talking about. They go into the cave and they find, that's cave number 1. I'll talk about the numbering of caves and so on. It was the first cave to be explored and discovered amongst the 11 caves of the Qumran that yielded Dead Sea Scrolls in the first instance. And in the next slide, you'll see the very mouth of this cave that the stone made its way through. And inside the cave, that's the opening of the cave. Inside the cave, Muhammad bin and his cousin see some clay jars with lids on them. And opening these clay jars, even though they're strewn around the cave, lots of fragments and bits and pieces, they open the jars, breaking a couple of them, and take out and leave with 7 parchment scrolls, parchment made of leather, because it's valuable material. They couldn't read them, of course, or even understand why there was writing on them, but leather is important, and scrolls of leather. So they take these 7 scrolls with them, and the father, the next day or 2, decides to take them to a cobbler who was on the side, an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem. Kando was his name. And he takes these scrolls to Kando to offer them for sale. Kando pays a pittance for them. This stuff is falling apart. But you know what? It might be worth something. And if you find any more, bring it along. Kando, for his reasons of his own, makes 2 parcels out of the scrolls. A parcel of 4 scrolls and a parcel of 3 scrolls. The 4 scrolls he offers to the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church based in Jerusalem. And remember, we're talking about 1947, October, November of 1947. Kando, the independence war has not as yet broken out, but there are already hostilities. He offers these 4 scrolls to Mar Samuel, the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church, who decides to buy them for 24 pounds sterling. And Mar Samuel buys them not because he actually wanted to keep them, but as an investment. And then he of course takes them with him to East Jerusalem. And then he contacts a scholar in Jerusalem, a man by the name of Eliezer Lippe Sukenik. And Sukenik, a noted scholar of Hebrew and ancient Hebrew, is offered these scrolls that were found in clay jars like the ones you see in front of you. Notice the lid, like a frisbee or a Hershey's Kiss, that was used to seal these clay jars that were manufactured, we know, in Qumran, because they're very unique and unique to Qumran. And that's the way the scrolls were stored. Sukenik, actually, when he is offered these scrolls, on 29th of November 1947, it's already a little dangerous to be traveling around the country, but the war has not yet broken out, the War of Independence. So Sukenik dresses like an Arab with a kafia and an Arab robe, and he walks from West Jerusalem, where he was based, at Hebrew University, to East Jerusalem, a place where any of you who have been to the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem know exactly where I'm talking about, to the bus station in East Jerusalem, where in those days and to this day, buses run all through the West Bank from there and all through the country, actually. And there he gets on a bus to Bethlehem to meet up with Candu. He purchases the 3 scrolls from Candu, comes back and starts immediately on the 29th of November 1947. It's an auspicious date this year. I'll tell you why I keep mentioning it. He is working on the translation and the deciphering these scrolls. And the scroll that he's working on is the Thanksgiving scroll. The 3 scrolls that he has purchased, one of them we call Q1 Isaiah B, and we'll talk about why the B and not A. The other one, the Thanksgiving scroll that he's working on, and the third one, a sectarian document called the War Scroll, about a apocalyptical battle that is going to take place between the children of light and the children of darkness. Now, Sukenik actually writes in his diary that it is very auspicious that he is doing this work on this scroll on the 29th of November 1947, because that is the very day the UN decides to partition British Mandate Palestine to leaving a part of the ancient land of Israel for an independent Jewish state. And he is working on a document that was written the last time there was an independent sovereign Jewish state during the Hasmonean period. And he thought this was very auspicious that this should be happening. Now, there's already, fast forward, the War of Independence, and travel not just becomes dangerous between East and West Jerusalem, but impossible. And thus the outreach of Mar Samuel, the patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox, to Sukenik, who he figured might want to purchase these scrolls, fall through, because there's no communication and financing falls through, and thus the 4 scrolls remain with the patriarch Mar Samuel. Samuel eventually ends up in the very early 1950s in New York, and he's trying to sell these scrolls, and he hasn't got a buyer, so he loans them to a school for translation and for working on the scrolls while he searches for a buyer. On the 1st of June, 1954, he places an ad in the Wall Street Journal, and you see the ad in front of you. You can read Diad. Auspiciously, the son of Sukenik, a very famous figure in Israeli modern history, man by the name of Yigal Yadin. Many of you know that he was the one who excavated Masada. That's him there sitting at his desk. Happens to be, he was also incidentally chief of staff alongside Ben Gurion during the War of Independence. And he happens to be in New York at the time on a fundraising mission when someone brings the ad to his notice. He immediately gets emissaries to negotiate with Mar Samuel for the purchase of these 4 scrolls and for the princely son. Remember, Mar Samuel buys these scrolls for 24 pounds sterling, about $100 US at the time, and he sells them to Yigal Yadin on behalf of Israel, of course, for the princely sum of $250,000 US. He makes a very nice profit on his investment, but we got a bargain that you can't refute, because these 4 scrolls, amongst them was the one complete scroll of Isaiah in the Masoretic text that we call 1Q, 1 for the cave number, Q for Qumran, Isaiah, A. The one biblical scroll that was found complete. And that, with 3 other scrolls, are purchased and brought back to Israel by the son of Sukenik, who obviously changed his name, Hebraizing his name. Here. Now, Israel builds, and you shall see this in the next slide, a special shrine of the book, it's called. Many of you have visited in the Israel Museum complex in the early 60s, 1960s, to house these 7 scrolls. This is all the while that Jordan has control of the West Bank and control of the finding of the rest of the scroll, but 7 of them are in Israeli hands, and a special building is constructed to house them. Now, you know, as soon as it's the word gets out that these scrolls are valuable, a treasure hunt takes place in all the hills. And I'm talking about from 1947, 1948 onwards. To the Jordanians' credit, they put a stop to the treasure hunt, formed a committee to deal with the work and translation of these scrolls, and a committee and a group of explorers to search the other caves for more. Of course, the Bedouin were best at finding the caves, and usually the Bedouin got to the caves before the archaeologists. But work takes place looking for more and more scrolls from 1948 on, right up until the last of the caves found, 1954, 55, cave number 11. The treasure hunt is on. Now, I want to talk a moment about the numbering of the caves. You'll notice that a number first and then Q, which stands for Qumran. The number of the cave before Q is the order in which they were found. 11 caves are eventually found, containing scrolls and fragments of scrolls, and we're going to show you some of these caves as we move along the slides. You see there cave 1 and cave 2. And all the documents marked first of all, marked with the cave number, Qumran, and the type of document found. Each fragment is or group of fragments is numbered in this way. The cave you're seeing here is the 4th one to be found. It's very special because it contains fragments of more than 400 different copies of different scrolls. Now, the scrolls were in terrible condition in cave number 4 because they weren't placed in jars. They were laid on the floor, shelves, and they disintegrated. And it was pretty tough work getting the pieces of singular scrolls in one bunch so they could be reassembled and read. But cave number 4, the mother lode of the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, is the one that one sees from the site of Qumran, right at its southern tip of the ruins. One looks over across the Wadi and sees cave number 4, the mother lode. In fact, in cave number 4, other very important finds were found as well. Tefillin, the phylacteries, micro-calligraphy rolls that were rolled into the phylacteries that the Jews, to this day, bind on their hands and in front of their eyes, as dictated by Deuteronomy. And to this day, this is done. They find mezuzah, the mezuzah, scrolls of mezuzah, and that's why we call cave number 4 the motherland. Now, the fragments are gathered according to, this is incidentally the closest of the caves to Qumran. And when we talk about the ruins itself and the Essenes and the numbers of people there, one of the things that were argued for centuries, for decades, not for centuries, for decades, was that how could it be that Qumran would have had maybe 150 people? Where did they sleep? Well, some suggestions were that maybe they slept in one of the caves, and one of the closer caves to Qumran is this one, where along the path of the cave, archaeologists in the 60s, Israeli archaeologists, after the Six-Day War, found some 65 nails, sandal nails, Roman sandal nails, that fell off the sandals of the people who would walk back and forth from Qumran to the cave. And thus, from the findings in the cave, it was estimated that maybe this was one of the sleeping places for the Essenes. Now, in the next couple of slides, I want to race forward and show you, because when we talk about piles of parchment on the scraped up from the floor and put in shoe boxes to be transported to, and remember, once again, I remind you, this is under Jordanian rule. And under Jordanian rule, East Jerusalem is part of the West Bank. And in East Jerusalem, there's a museum called the Rockefeller Museum. That's the hall in the Rockefeller Museum that you're looking at, where this specially formulated committee, formulated by the Jordanians, as I mentioned, with no Israelis, of course, because there was just a war with Israel and Jordan, but no Jews either. And they're studying Jewish documents in Hebrew. But imagine the tremendous task. You know, many people were suspected that there was some sort of conspiracy to keep everything quiet, and that's why things weren't published quickly. Well, there was no conspiracy. The church or neither the Christians nor the Jewish authorities tried to suppress any information coming out of the scrolls. It was just very difficult, hard work, especially without the computers. Imagine trying to put together boxes of jigsaw puzzles, 100 pieces, 1,000 pieces in each box, all messed up together, and you have to sort them out. So this is what you're seeing in front of you at the Rockefeller Museum, that was under Jordanian charge right up until 1967. And of course, the scrolls that were sent elsewhere have remained elsewhere, but all the scrolls in the Rockefeller Museum were under Israeli authority from 1967 onwards. But one of the reasons why publication was a little slow was the tremendously hard work of actually putting fragments together and coming up with a fraction of a document. In the next couple of slides, you're going to see Qumran itself. This is an aerial view of the ruins, and the Jordanians appoint a French archaeologist, whose name is Roland Divon, to explore, to be in charge not only of the finds in the caves, but also to explore the ruins of Qumran. And he spends a few years here, from 1952 to 1957, if I remember rightly, or close to 1956, 57, exploring Qumran. And I wanted to go through some of it to give you an inside view of the type of life that these Essenes had in Qumran. In the next couple of slides, we'll take you through the site itself, Qumran, where this is a photo from the time of the find, where what you see in front of you are bowls, eating bowls, that have all broken and fallen on the floor, still in piles, still neatly stacked, but all broken. These bowls were found by Deveau and his fellow archaeologists in what was then a sealed off room, a pantry, right beside a large assembly hall and dining room. And Deveau, most of us believe, rightly comes to the conclusion that what you see here is evidence of an earthquake that stopped for a period of maybe a couple of years, 2-3 years at the maximum, life in Qumran. Because we know that the Essenes, or if you don't want to call them Essenes, don't call them Essenes, but the people who settled in Qumran were there from around 140 BC all the way through to 31 BC, when we know there was an earthquake. They abandoned, and they come back a couple of years later to resettle, cleaning up the mess. But the mess in this pantry is too big for them to even worry about, so they just wall it off and forget about it. In the next slides, you're going to see the dining room itself, that is called the assembly hall. But before we do that, I want to show you the way one gets access around the entire site of Qumran, sometimes raised above the ruins, of course, so that you can see them below you without having to walk through them. And very accessible site today. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to be showing you a few of the discoveries in Qumran. The dining room. We call it the dining room or the assembly hall. And we know that this is a very, very important room for the Essenes, because this group had communal meals. Not only Pliny the Elder, but Josephus and the Essenes themselves. They don't call themselves the Essenes, incidentally. They call themselves Yahad, or the children of light. Right in there, one of their sectarian documents, the rules of the community, how important it is to be purified before you come in for your meal, sitting down while the cook places your bowl of food of one type and your bread, specially baked, before anyone touches the food, of course. Thanks. Grace is said, and the bread is broken. At the end of the meal, Thanksgiving, and then they have their discussions and assembly and so on. And the pantry that's sealed off with all the broken crockery is right beside this room, the dining room. All our sources point to this as being what is called the assembly hall in Qumran. Incidentally, you need to realize that there were Essenes all over the country in small communities, but this community of Qumran seems to have been a special community living a very priestly-like life. In fact, being perhaps a temporary alternative to the temple and the high priest temple, who they regarded as usurpers and not legitimate, and were the children of darkness, while they were the children of light. This we know from the other documents. In the next couple of slides, I want to show you some more scenes through to show you some of the important things. This is another view of the large assembly hall and dining room with the sealed off pantry where we found all that crockery to the right. Now, one of the more important things in Qumran, of course, the most important things would be the connection with the scrolls. And right at the entrance into the archaeological site is what appears to be a two-story building that today you approach by wooden steps and climb. And this was a tower. Now, whether this tower was a Hasmonean outpost that the Essenes eventually incorporated and used in their settlement, but they certainly would use it also as a watchtower, because it is right on the northwestern side of the ruin. And if you're coming to Qumran, you come from that side of Jerusalem down towards Qumran, from Jericho down towards Qumran. So if you're going to have a watchtower, that's the place to have it. We climbed this watchtower today by wooden steps. And in the next couple of slides, you'll see what we see from the top of this watchtower. This is probably the most important room. This we call the scriptorium. The scriptorium because it is believed that here, not all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in fact, perhaps only a small fraction of them were laboriously copied out here before being wrapped in leather in jars and hidden in the caves. And we'll talk about why they did all of this. But what is the proof that this room served as the writing room? Well, we find that it was, DeVoe found that it was a two-story room with the upper floor containing what you're going to see in a moment in the following slide. Fragments, no, the back one, the fragments of plaster covered rubble or stone in two different forms. Low bench that one would imagine they're sitting on, and a very unusually narrow and long table. Defoe, most of us believe, rightly concluded that this was not a place where one sat and ate, but where one perhaps wrote scrolls. Well, maybe not so rightly concluded, because one would write scrolls wherever they could, but to complete the scroll, to complete the parchment, one would need a long, narrow, flat surface to put the pages, and I say pages, of course, because I want to talk very briefly about what the scroll is actually made out of. It's parchment usually, although we did find some papyrus and even a couple of ostracods, pottery shards from. But the main find was from parchment, and the parchment, when you were copying a particular scroll, would have to be cut uniform for that scroll in its width, because on the parchment you would inscribe columns of writing. The columns, you could have put in as many columns as you possibly could fit on a page of parchment. The longer pieces of parchment would have more columns. The shorter ones would have a couple of columns, at least 2 or 3 columns. But then you would need to sew in sequence these pages of parchment together so they could be rolled up in a scroll. And this would be very valuable to have such a long table to actually do the work on, make the corrections on before the scroll could be complete. Now, the proof, as they say, is in the pudding, and what we also found, or what DeVoe also found in the site, were inkwells. And that's the next slide that you're going to see. Please don't imagine that as an enormous size of a jug, but somewhere between an espresso cup, an espresso coffee cup, and a thimble is the size of these inkwells. And it's a very in any sites, but in Qumran we found 2 in the scriptorium and another 3 or 4 scattered elsewhere. And amazingly, with DNA testing in one of the inkwells, at least 3 or 4 scraps of fragments use that same DNA ink. So we know that at least some, maybe a very small quantity of the scrolls were actually written in that scriptorium. Now, if we continue with the look, you know, if you know anything about the Essenes, you know that they were really into ritual washing. How are you going to be ritually washing yourself or purifying yourself before every meal? Every time you did something that they considered, and they were the strictest of the sects, impure, you would have to go to the mikveh, the ritual bath, and soak yourself in the ritual bath. Where are you going to get water from? Well, they had the answer. Wadi Qumran has water rushing in from 800 meters above in Jerusalem to 400 meters below by the Dead Sea, trapping them in dams and bringing them in not like Roman aqueducts, of course, but in much more primitive aqueduct style, into a series of systems and ritual baths, so they could perform their ritual purification as well as have drinking water. Most of the water, I would say, was used for ritual purposes rather than for drinking, and you're going to see this in the next couple of slides. Here is a water store where here probably the water was more specifically used for drinking water, because it was one of the first to receive water before it flowed on to other sites. But in the following slide, you're going to see what at first appears system, steps leading down into a system. Why would anyone take up valuable room in a system for steps? Unless you were going to be using it not for just water storage, but for a large ritual bath. And the dead giveaway, of course, are the dividers that you see running down these steps. Now, I want to point out, if you look closely, you'll see the earthquake damage of 31 BC. That isn't, they don't bother to repair too much there, but continue to use the system for ritual bath. Now, the dividers, we see them in other places as well, sometimes in Jerusalem, mark where one goes down into impure into the ritual bath and comes up the other side, purified, ritually purified, without the danger of squeaking past someone who's coming down a clearly marked route, here down to be purified and up purified over. So this is the way they handle their water. They were also, of course, dedicated smaller mikvot strewn throughout. And, you know, when you say maybe 150, 200 people living in Qumran, tremendous amount of ritual baths. But if you remember that every time they had a meal or broke bread, they would first have to ritually purify themselves, you'll understand why. Here's another large water collection with the plaster from 2,100 years ago, still holding. I want to show you now another couple of slides and perhaps a short video to run you through the site. But when you're at the site, you see the shed at the far distance. You walk to that shed and you look across to your right and you see cave number 4, where the mother lode was found. As I said, the site is, I would say, not the most exciting site one can visit from the point of view of the ruins, because usually we visit Qumran after we've visited Masada. Masada is much more impressive with its ruins. But the history that is in this site at Qumran make it what it is. And thus, even though one walks through mainly ruins, not that impressive, because the Essenes had a very aesthetic lifestyle. It is still a site that, in my view, is a must. In the next couple of slides, we may get another view or two of, here's the video, a short video that I'll take advantage of by talking about the Essenes a little bit and some of the scrolls. As I said, when we evaluate all of the finds from the 11 caves, and you remember I mentioned Q1 to Q11, there are 3 different classes of scrolls that we can identify. Biblical books that we know of that are in the Jewish Old Testament today, apocryphal books that are sometimes included, that are not sometimes, that are always included in the Ethiopian church Bibles and the Catholic church Bibles, some of them with Jubilees and Enoch and other such books. But only one book of the Bible books is missing. And that's the book of Esther. And when one tries to figure out why Esther, why all the other books, some of them in dozens of copies, the most copied book, Isaiah, but some of them in dozens of copies and not a single copy, not a single fragment of Esther. Well, the Essenes tell us themselves, because in their sectarian document called the Rules of the Community, they write about how important it is to keep and mention the name of God and to keep the writings of the ancients for future generations. And this is exactly what they were doing. But Esther not mentioning the name of God once is disqualified apparently by the Essenes, and they don't consider it a holy book. You're now inside the shrine of the book, but the replica of Isaiah 1Q Isaiah A, it's a replica, the real one is in the vault down below. And here we are back in Qumran after the video, and I want to talk about another Indiana Jones story here. You know, Qumran is absolutely fascinating with the background, treasure hunt, of disguises, going in and purchasing like a spy novel, disguising yourself to go in and to Bethlehem to buy scrolls and so on. But one of the most, I would say, Indiana Jones stories with these Dead Sea Scrolls come out of cave number 3. Cave number 3, 3Q copper, other copper scrolls. Now, please don't be misled. This is not the way they were found. This is a replica on new copper. When I talk about copper scrolls, imagine a height of copper sheet, sometimes riveted together to make the sheet longer. Copper sheet with Hebrew letters beaten into them, embossed into them to create what they thought perhaps was a more permanent scroll, even though the leather scrolls, the parchment scrolls survived better than the copper scrolls. This is only for illustration purposes of a replica, but if you want to see in the next slide what they looked like when they were found, the next slide will show you these copper scrolls, the way they were found. And today, if you want to see them, you have to go to Amman, Jordan. They're in the PAM Museum, the Palestinian Archaeological Museum in Amman, in a special glass case, because when they were found, of course, they were found in 53, the Jordanians had them, and it took decades to actually display them like this, because in the next slide, you're going to see how they were actually found, not in clear strips like this, but like that. And of course, anyone would be frightened to even try to open them up to read them, because they could disintegrate at a touch. So it's decades after they were found that they are sent to by the Jordanians to Manchester, England, where a specially designed machine is used to cut the scroll in its length, and you can see now the size of the scroll, about 9-10 inches in height. Cut the scroll in its length in the thinnest of possible blades, thinner than a hair strand, in strips, so that these strips could be opened and laid alongside each other, as you saw in the glass case in the Amman Museum, to be deciphered. They didn't have to be deciphered because they were in very clear heat. Now, I want to read you, if you permit me, just one or two of the what we found. The whole scroll has been deciphered, but what we found, written, a Khorba, in the very first line. A Khorba which is in the vale of Ahor, under the stairs which go eastwards 40 cubits, a box filled with silver, weighing in all 17 talents. And then, mysteriously, 3 Greek letters. We don't know the significance of The second line, in the tomb of, something's missing there. The third, 100 gold bars. Third line, in the great cistern, which is in the courtyard of the little colonnade at its very bottom, closed with sediment towards the upper opening, 900 talents. And it goes on and on and on, listing treasures hidden. And you can imagine how this fires the imagination of explorers, of treasure hunters, who to this day are searching. And
Reuven, let me get in two quick questions that are sort of repeating as themes from the audience before you move on. I know you have more material to cover. First of all, is the only source that we have now for distance of the Essenes from Josephus? How do we know that that account is accurate? And go ahead with that.
Wonderful question. No, it's not the only source. Pliny the Elder, the Roman historian, geographer, writes about the Essenes, about their habits, where they are at the northwestern edge of the Dead Sea. Josephus writes at length, and if we have time, I'll give you a few quotes from Josephus, at length about the habits of the Essenes. He mentions the three sects in Judaism, Sadducees, Pharisees, and Essenes, and he spends 3 pages writing about the Essenes and their habits. And then all of this up totally, we have the Essenes themselves, who don't call themselves the Essenes, the Yachad, who write exactly the practices that Josephus tells us about, including the toiletry practices, and if we have time, we can talk about them as well. Fascinating, of the Essenes. So it all fits together, even though there are still some holdouts saying, well, we can't be sure it was the Essenes, and we can't be sure they were Essenes, and we can't be sure that they copied the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the vast majority of scholars and tour guides and people who have delved into it more deeply are convinced that the basis is Essenes, Qumran, and Dead Sea Scrolls. But the treasure copper scrolls, if we get time, we can talk about all the various theories about them. And is it a hoax? If it's a hoax, it's a very expensive 2,000-year-old hoax, and no one would make a hoax like that because it would be cheaper to do it on clay or parchment. Yes, another question?
Well, let's keep going. We only have a short time left, and I know you have some more slides, and I'm a big Indiana Jones fan, so I want to hear more of the adventure and more of this. I guess one of the main questions, though, Reuven, is, do we think all of the scrolls have been found? And I know there have been subsequent findings even recently, and maybe we can make sure we get that in.
Excellent. That's the next portion that we're going to see now. We can come back maybe to the copper scrolls in a moment, but people are still looking. People are still looking, and I had the incredible fortune of actually being what might become cave number 12, Q12, where Dr. Randall Price from the Liberty University was carrying out an excavation in a cave that was very close to Qumran, not far from cave number 4, and and I had the pleasure of visiting, and they found, you'll see this in a couple of slides, they found a cave with, that's Dr. Randall Price, at the entrance of the cave, and it hasn't been published yet, the actual findings of we found a few scraps in there, but have a look at what situation the cave was in. Obviously, the Bedouin got there first. We don't know when, we don't know how long ago, but it was pretty well thrashed. The jugs were broken pieces here and there, but a few fragments of scrolls that clearly related to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this might be relegated a cave number for Q, 12Q. A short video will show you where this cave is placed, if we can play it, if not. But you can see the mouth of the cave. These are the students who came and visited and helped and volunteered to work on the cave. Now, if you have a look, a sweep around, you're seeing the plantings of the kibbutz Kalia, and of course, the Dead Sea in the distance. And here and I'm talking about a find here in 2017. So the find that you recently heard about, only a couple of months ago, the press talked about, we have found for the first time since the original discoveries, fragments of the Dead Sea Scroll. Well, you can see that wasn't 100% accurate because Randall Price found scrolls a couple of years, or 4 years even, before this find in the Cave of Horrors. And that's our next stop. The Cave of Horrors is not actually one of the Qumran caves. It's a cave that was very thoroughly excavated in 1961 and during the Jordanian rule in the area. And there they found some 40 skeletons. That's why the name, the Cave of Horrors, that were clearly skeletons of Jews who, during the Bar Kokhba revolt, a long time after the Essenes, but not that long, 60 years after the Essenes, hid and perished in those caves. But just recently, and this is the picture from this recent re-examination of these caves, just recently in the last couple of months, some more elements that were missed the first time around come to light. Something from the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the next slide, you'll see in the next couple of slides, but something even more amazing, I think, in a lot of ways from that cave. Fragments, and these fragments in Greek, with the next fragments you see that are in Greek, and you'll be able to clearly see this. And these fragments actually link with the earlier Greek translation of the Old Testament. You may remember the Septuagint, that are part of the book of the 12 minor prophets, Nahum or Habakkuk. And these fragments relate to what was earlier found in 1961. So this is not a new scroll, and it probably wasn't placed there by the Essenes, but carried by the Bar Kokhba, because it was a treasure carried and kept in a cave that they hid out in. But it dates to, as you can see, the same period. But the other findings in this cave, the modern findings, are startling. You're looking at a basket, it's enormous. This basket dates, say, 10,000 years, at least. 8,000 BC. Look at it, incredible. And it's not as small as you might think. In the next pictures, you'll see how it's being carefully cleaned up and restored. An enormous basket, a very special find. And in the final slide, to illustrate, one more slide to illustrate that the cave called the Cave of Horrors is really a Cave of Horrors, because here, also uncovered in the recent excavations, was a 4,000 years old skeleton, at least, in fact, a 4,000 BC skeleton, at least from the Neolithic age, of a young girl huddled up, and all of this in the Cave of Horrors. So this finding of more Dead Sea Scrolls was a little bit of overhype, because they weren't more Dead Sea Scrolls. That was the refinding of some of the fragments that were missed the last time around, and they weren't placed there by the Essenes quite clearly. And now, Wayne, we have time for as many questions as.
Well, I'll just try to run through. What an amazing story. It looks like we have a lot of Indiana Jones wannabes in the audience, there's a question if there are other caves that require rappelling in order to get to them, where they suspect there are scrolls.
Yes, cave number 4, in fact, had to be approached and enlarged from up on top because it was up on a sheer cliff and couldn't be approached by foot. So they had to go up from up on top and rappel down and open the opening. But the Cave of Horrors is totally inapproachable unless you get down by rope and rappelling, of course.
And
I have to point out the Cave of Horrors is not in the same area at all. It's much further south towards En-Gedi.
Okay. Early on, when you showed us that fascinating piece of history from the Wall Street Journal and the purchase of, I guess, 4 of the scrolls that happened, there was a question about how much the whole 7 cost. So in other words, the other 3 were. It sounded like that was not part of the $250,000. Do you know what the amount of purchase was on the others?
No. The first loads of scrolls, the 7 scrolls in 2 batches, 3 and 4, were sold by Kando, who didn't realize how valuable they really were. Now, when Mar Samuel paid his £24 sterling, which was a lot of money in those days, $100 in 1947, a lot of money, he realized that these scrolls are valuable. We do not know what the Hebrew University paid for the other 3 scrolls, but it wasn't in the thousands. We don't know what they paid. It would have been similar amounts, I would imagine. But then when Mar Samuel hears that Sukemnik has purchased the remainder of scrolls, maybe he wants to purchase the other 4. But unfortunately for Sukemnik, because he would have got them much cheaper than Yigal Yadin eventually did, and unfortunately for Mar Samuel, or maybe very fortunately for Mar Samuel, the independence war interfered and it had to wait for the chance meeting of Yigal Yadin and his intermediaries with Mar Samuel.
Reuven, could you give us one quick explanation or summary about the collaboration between Sukemnik and Yadin? Aside from this great story of him, the son finding about this opportunity, were they active collaborators? Were there other aspects of the actual archaeology that they worked on together?
Absolutely. They were both scholars and archaeologists, and much more Sukemnik, incidentally, those of you who visited the synagogue at Beit Alpha and the beautiful mosaic, Sukemnik was the archaeologist there. And those who haven't visited Masada should visit, but those who have visited Masada realize that was mainly, majorly excavated by Yigal Yadin, his son. They were both incredible archaeologists, scholars, and Yigal Yadin, you could say, in his later years, grew up alongside his father from 1947 to 1954, working on these scrolls. When Yigal Yadin was a much younger man and his father was already a seasoned scholar, he continues the line, Yigal Yadin, with the purchase and work on the other 4 scrolls from Mar Samuel.
Well, Reuven, needless to say, I think you just gave us a Father's Day present in advance with that story and the unlocking of the riches of the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran. The figure, the photos and the images that you're showing are just absolutely fascinating. Each one of them deserving of the attention that they get, and in the amazing museum in Jerusalem, where you can see the actual scrolls themselves. And we can't wait to get back to see them and appreciate so much you're taking us on this virtual journey. In the meantime, those of you that are with us week in and week out, you know that we don't stop. We will be back on Wednesday with a special program on cybersecurity with experts both from the United States and from Israel. And then next week in the United States, over Memorial Day weekend, we've got a special barbecue special. So those of you that are getting ready to pull out the barbecues for summer, whether in Israel or the United States, we've got some Louisiana barbecue going down on the American side, and a real treat. The Qumran here is going to be a lamb. So for the lighthearted and vegetarians, this may not be the episode for you, but this is going to be a great twist on the summer Memorial Day barbecues in the United States. So we hope everyone will come join us. And again, we are looking forward to more and more great adventures, both virtually and in person when we can. In the meantime, next month, Reuven's taking us to one of my favorite spots, Sipori. That's going to be an amazing new adventure for us to experience together. So Reuven, thanks for the great time that we had together today. You helped us on our escape to the Dead Sea, and we're looking forward to continuing the series.
Shalom and stay safe.